The holographic display of Earth rotated slowly in the center of the bridge, aboard the Zorathak flagship, Inevitable Triumph. Commander Vex's Thorin, known throughout the fleet simply as Vexorian, studied the blue-green orb with his compound eyes, narrowing in anticipation. His 6 appendages twitched, with barely contained excitement, as he addressed the assembled officers. "Gentlemen and ladies of varying biological configurations," Vexorian announced, his voice resonating with the confidence of a commander who had successfully conquered 47 worlds. "Our next acquisition sits before us. The natives call it Earth. We call it our next trophy." Vice Admiral Klakina, whose 12 eyes were arranged in a perfect circle around her bulbous head, cleared her throat with a sound resembling a malfunctioning engine. "Commander, if I may remind you of the preliminary intelligence report, Earth is classified as a Class 15 Deathworld." "A bureaucratic exaggeration," Vexorian dismissed with a wave of his upper right appendage. "Look at it. Mostly water, scattered landmasses, primitive technological capabilities. Their most advanced weapons still rely on chemical propellants and basic nuclear fission." Subcommander Grizzlethorpe, a semi-translucent being who communicated through controlled bubble emissions, released a series of concerned pops and gurgles. The translation matrix interpreted, "Sir, with respect, the Class 15 designation wasn't assigned because of their technology. It's their environment that concerns us." "The environment?" Vexorian's laughter echoed through the command deck. "We've conquered ice planets, methane swamps, and literal fire worlds. What could possibly be so dangerous about this garden planet?" Chief Strategist Blurpington, a purple fungoid creature whose analytical abilities were legendary, swiveled his cap-like head toward the commander. "Sir, their entertainment programs alone suggest a species with abnormal risk tolerance. They train themselves to survive through recreational storytelling involving dangers that would terminate most sentient life forms." "Storytelling?" Vexorian scoffed. "You're worried about mythology?" Technical specialist Quibbleton, whose oversized cranium housed what the Zorathak Empire considered the equivalent of a quantum supercomputer, approached the hologram with trepidation. "Commander, I've only managed to read the first 300 pages of the 14,000-page intelligence report, but I've already identified several concerning factors." "Such as?" Vexorian's patience was wearing thin. "Their atmosphere contains 21% oxygen. And, sir, we use that concentration as rocket fuel." A momentary silence fell across the bridge before Vexorian waved dismissively. "Our ships are properly sealed. What else?" "Their oceans contain a salt concentration capable of corroding our hull alloys within hours of exposure." Vexorian's mandibles clicked in irritation. "We won't be swimming, Quibbleton." Sir," Quibbleton continued, his voice rising an octave. "They have regular atmospheric electrical discharges with enough power to overload our shield generators. They call them thunderstorms. And the wind velocities in certain weather phenomena exceed 300 kilometers per hour. The mightiest Zorathak fleet won't be deterred by a little rain and wind," Vexorian declared, straightening to his full 3-meter height. "Any other trivial concerns before I order our descent?" Klakina stepped forward once more. "Sir, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. Standard protocol for Class 15 Deathworlds recommends extensive reconnaissance before—" "We've done reconnaissance," Vexorian interrupted, pointing to the hologram. "We've been observing them for the standard conquest preparation period. Their defenses are primitive, their global unification non-existent. They still fight among themselves over arbitrary territorial boundaries and resource allocation." Grizzlethorpe bubbled furiously, the translation coming through as, "Commander, we've detected thousands of nuclear weapons on their surface." "Which they've never used in a global conflict," Vexorian countered. "They're too afraid of their own weaponry. Besides, our shields can withstand far worse." Blurpington quietly added, "Their recreational activities include jumping from high elevations with minimal safety equipment, running in front of large horned mammals, and consuming neurotoxins for pleasure. Enough! Vexorian slammed his appendage on the conference table, causing the hologram to flicker momentarily. We are the Zorathak Empire, conquerors of the Andromeda Arm. We will not be intimidated by a species that hasn't even achieved interplanetary colonization. The commander turned to the navigation officer. Set coordinates for their largest ocean, the Atlantic. I believe they call it. There's a significant storm system developing there that should provide excellent cover for our arrival. We'll emerge directly in the heart of this hurricane, as they call it, demonstrate our technological superiority by remaining completely unaffected, and then proceed with standard conquest protocol. As the crew scrambled to reconfigure the hyperdrive engines for the precise jump, Quibbleton's eyes darted nervously between his data terminal and the commander. Sir, the hurricane you've selected has sustained winds of 200 kilometers per hour and wave heights exceeding 15 meters. Perfect, Vexorian smiled, revealing rows of serrated teeth. The locals will be too busy with their primitive disaster response to mount any meaningful resistance. Prepare for hyperspace jump in 3, 2, 1. The stars outside the viewports elongated into streaks of light as the inevitable Triumph and its escort fleet tore through the fabric of spacetime, hurtling toward what Vexorian was certain would be his 48th conquered world. None of them noticed Quibbleton quietly beginning to experience what the Zorathak medical manual classified as an existential cascade failure, as he continued reading the Earth Intelligence Report. The transition from hyperspace to normal space should have been smooth. It was not. The moment the inevitable Triumph materialized in Earth's atmosphere, it was greeted by a wall of water, moving at speeds that would have impressed even the most seasoned Zorathak naval engineers. The massive vessel shuddered violently as hurricane-force winds slammed into its starboard side, sending alarms blaring throughout the command deck. "Status report!" Vexorian bellowed, clinging to his command chair as the ship pitched sideways. "Hull integrity at 87% and falling," shouted the engineering officer over the cacophony of emergency signals. "Sir, the rainwater contains salt. It's already beginning to corrode our external sensor arrays." "Impossible!" Vexorian snarled. "Activate stabilizers and deploy shield generators at maximum capacity." Cloquina was frantically scanning the environmental readings. "Commander, the atmospheric electrical discharge levels are off the charts. I'm detecting lightning strikes with power exceeding our primary plasma cannons." As if to punctuate her assessment, a massive bolt of lightning struck the ship's communication array, sending cascades of electrical feedback through the bridge systems. Several control panels exploded in showers of sparks, and the overhead lights flickered ominously. "Return fire!" Vexorian commanded, his composure beginning to crack. "Target the center of this storm system with plasma cannons." The weapons officer stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, we can't shoot a storm." "Watch me!" Vexorian pushed the officer aside and personally activated the firing sequence. The inevitable Triumph discharged its forward plasma cannons, sending brilliant blue-white energy beams into the heart of the hurricane. For a brief moment, the storm clouds parted, only to close again almost immediately, completely unaffected by the assault. Worse, the intense humidity in the atmosphere had partially diffused the plasma beams, reducing their effectiveness to nearly zero. "Impossible," Vexorian whispered, his mandibles hanging slack in disbelief. Grizzlethorpe was bubbling in panic, his translation coming through in fragments. "Never seen. Atmospheric conditions. Should retreat." Another massive wave struck the ship, this time from below, lifting the massive vessel several hundred meters before dropping it with bone-jarring force. The artificial gravity generators flickered, momentarily causing everyone on the bridge to float before slamming back down to the deck. "Commander!" the communications officer shouted. "We're receiving transmissions from the surface. 3 small vessels are approaching our position." "Earth military response?" Vexorian asked, hope rising in his voice. Fighting humans would be far preferable to fighting this incomprehensible weather system. Negative, sir. They appear to be fishing vessels, small watercraft with minimal technology. They're broadcasting on simple radio frequencies in a language identified as Portuguese. What are they saying? The communications officer looked puzzled. They're asking if we need assistance. They think we're in distress. Vexorian blinked all four of his eyes in succession. They're offering to help us. Do they not recognize a conquest fleet when they see one? Blurpington leaned forward. Sir, based on their entertainment programs, they likely believe we're filming what they call a science fiction movie. Their cultural references include numerous examples of spacecraft appearing during storms. This is preposterous, Vexorian muttered. We are the Zorathak Empire, not some primitive entertainment production. Should we respond to their hail? The communications officer asked. Before Vexorian could answer, another lightning bolt struck the ship, this time hitting one of the main engine housings. The resulting power surge caused systems throughout the vessel to shut down and restart in rapid succession. Damage report, Vexorian demanded. Primary engines offline. Secondary systems operating at 40% capacity. Hull integrity down to 73%, and continuing to degrade due to saltwater corrosion. Vexorian gripped the arms of his command chair, his knuckles whitening. Deploy scouts. I want boots on the ground. Find us a secure location to land and effect repairs. In this storm, sir? Klakina questioned. Would you rather stay here and wait for this vessel to disintegrate around us? Vexorian snapped. Launch the scouts, now. 3 scout ships detached from the inevitable Triumph, their sleek, aerodynamic forms designed to cut through even the most hostile atmospheric conditions. They had barely made it a kilometer from the mothership when disaster struck again. Commander, the surveillance officer cried. The scouts are under attack. Human defense systems? Vexorian asked, leaning forward eagerly. No, sir. They're being attacked by flying creatures. Large avian life forms are colliding with the scout ship's intake valves. On the view screen, Vexorian watched in horror as dozens of white birds, seagulls, according to the ship's database, swarmed the scout vessels, seemingly unconcerned by the hurricane-force winds. Several birds were sucked into the ship's propulsion systems, causing catastrophic failures that sent the scouts spiraling toward the ocean below. Are you telling me, Vexorian said, his voice dangerously quiet, that our advanced scout ships, equipped with technology capable of traversing galaxies, have been defeated by birds? Affirmative, sir. Scout 3 is signaling that they've managed to regain partial control and are attempting an emergency landing at the nearest shoreline. Vexorian slumped in his chair. Maintain position. Try not to get hit by any more lightning. And someone find me information on these seagulls. 90 minutes later, as the storm continued to batter the increasingly damaged, inevitable Triumph, Vexorian received the report he'd been waiting for. Scout 3 had successfully made an emergency landing in a small bay area where the storm's intensity was somewhat diminished. The scouting party had established contact with the local inhabitants, a small fishing community who, remarkably, seemed completely unfazed by both the raging hurricane and the arrival of alien visitors. They believe we're making an entertainment production? Vexorian asked incredulously, speaking via the damaged communication system to Lieutenant Zorf, the scout team leader. Affirmative. Commander. Zorf's voice crackled through the speaker. They've invited us to take shelter in their village until the storm passes. They call this place Porto das Tempestades, which roughly translates to Harbor of Storms. They live in a place they themselves name after dangerous weather phenomena? Klakina interjected, unable to contain her astonishment. Indeed. Vice Admiral, Zorf confirmed. And they seem quite proud of it. Their leader, a human called Captain Mauricio Santos, has offered us food and lodging. Should we accept? Vexorian considered his options, The mothership was sustaining increasingly serious damage from the storm. The conquest fleet was scattered across hundreds of kilometers of ocean, trying to maintain formation in the hurricane. And now his scouts were being offered hospitality by the very species they had come to subjugate. Accept their offer, he finally decided. Gather intelligence. I will join you with a small contingent once we've stabilized the ship's condition. Understood, Commander. Zorf out. As the communication ended, Vexorian turned to his senior officers. I want a shuttle prepared. I'll lead a diplomatic mission to these storm dwellers. Perhaps we can learn why our intelligence regarding Earth was so catastrophically incomplete. Sir, Quibbleton spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. I've just reached page 472 of the intelligence report. It appears that humans have an unusual relationship with danger. They deliberately seek it out in controlled circumstances. Explain, Vexorian demanded. They engage in activities called extreme sports, which involve placing themselves in potentially lethal situations for what they term entertainment, or adrenaline rush. They jump from high places with fabric canopies, slide down frozen mountains on narrow planks, and deliberately provoke large predators. That's insane, Klockner remarked. There's more, Quibbleton continued. Their culinary practices include deliberately consuming neurotoxins from specific marine animals, plants that cause pain receptors to fire, and fermented beverages that temporarily impair cognitive function. Vexorian's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting they're immune to toxins? Not immune, Commander. They simply enjoy them, in carefully measured amounts. The bridge fell silent as the implications of this information sank in. Prepare the shuttle, Vexorian finally ordered. I need to see these humans for myself. The landing was far from Vexorian's usual standard of military precision. The shuttle, buffeted by winds that seemed to change direction with malicious intent, nearly crashed into a cliff face before the pilot managed to set it down on a narrow strip of beach. As Vexorian and his small team of officers disembarked, they were immediately soaked by the torrential rain that continued to fall, despite the hurricane's eye having passed hours ago. Welcome to Porto das Tempestades, a booming voice called out over the howling wind. A stocky human with weathered skin and a thick beard approached, seemingly unconcerned by the weather conditions that had Vexorian's team struggling to remain upright. I am Captain Mauricio Santos, your friend's already inside, getting dry. Come. Vexorian straightened to his full height, prepared to deliver the standard conquest speech he had perfected over dozens of campaigns. Before he could speak, Santos had grabbed his upper appendage and was pulling him toward a collection of sturdy-looking structures built partially into the cliff face. Your movie very impressive, Santos shouted over his shoulder as he led the bewildered aliens toward the largest building. Special effects amazing. How you make ship float in storm. CGI very expensive. Yes? This isn't, Vexorian began, but his words were lost as a particularly violent gust of wind nearly knocked him off his feet. The structure they entered was warm, dimly lit, and filled with the most astonishing array of scents Vexorian had ever encountered. His olfactory sensors, designed to detect even the faintest trace of dangerous compounds, were overwhelmed by the mingling aromas of cooked marine life, fermented beverages, and what his database identified as various spices and herbs. A sign above the bar, illuminated by flickering electric lights, read Fisherman's Bar. The establishment was crowded with humans, many of whom turned to stare at the entering aliens before quickly returning to their conversations and drinks, as if the arrival of extraterrestrial beings was a common occurrence barely worth noting. Lieutenant Zorf approached quickly. Commander, I'm relieved you made it safely. The storm has intensified since our landing. Report, Vexorian demanded, still attempting to process the casual reception they were receiving. The locals are remarkably hospitable. Sir, they've provided shelter, dry clothing, though none that would fit our physiologies, and offered to share their food and drink. They remain convinced we're producing entertainment content. Have you attempted to clarify our actual purpose? I thought it best to maintain the misunderstanding for now. Sir, it's providing excellent cover for our intelligence gathering. Before Vexorian could respond, Santos returned with a small, elderly human female in tow. Her deeply lined face suggested advanced age, but she moved with surprising vigor. "This is my mother, Grandma Beatrice," Santos announced proudly. "Best cook in Puerto das Tempestades. She makes special fish stew for you and your film crew." Grandma Beatrice smiled, revealing a set of surprisingly intact teeth for a human of her apparent age. She spoke rapidly in Portuguese, which the translation matrix rendered as, "You poor things, caught in such weather. You must be starving. I've prepared my famous calderada, fish stew with extra piri-piri. It will warm you right up." "Piri-piri," Quibbleton whispered, frantically consulting his database. "Sir, that's a capsaicin-rich plant extract that humans deliberately add to food to cause pain sensation in their mouth tissues." "They intentionally inflict pain upon themselves while eating?" Grizzlethorpe bubbled in disbelief. "It appears so," Quibbleton confirmed, "and they seem to enjoy it." Vexorian was saved from having to respond by Santos, who was ushering them toward a long wooden table where several other humans were already seated, including members of the scout team who appeared to be engaged in animated conversation with the locals. "Sit, sit," Santos insisted. "Storm outside getting worse. Good thing you land when you did. Another hour. Maybe your fancy ship blown to rocks." As if to emphasize his point, a deafening crack of thunder shook the building, causing the lights to flicker momentarily. None of the humans seemed remotely concerned. "Does this weather not alarm you?" Klakina asked, her 12 eyes blinking in sequence as she took a seat at the table. Santos laughed heartily. This just Tuesday in Puerto das Tempestades. Wait until hurricane season. Then you see real storm." "You mean it gets worse than this?" Blurpington asked, his fungoid cap pulsating with anxiety. "Much worse," Santos confirmed cheerfully. "Last year, waves so big they washed fishing boat into my bedroom. Second floor." He roared with laughter at the memory, slapping his thigh in apparent delight. Vexorian exchanged glances with his officers, their expressions mirroring his own confusion. These humans didn't merely tolerate danger, they seemed to revel in it. Grandma Beatrice emerged from what appeared to be a cooking area, carrying an enormous pot that steamed aggressively. She was followed by a younger female human, carrying a stack of bowls, and a male carrying bottles of some amber liquid. "Eat, eat," Grandma Beatrice commanded, beginning to ladle generous portions of a thick, red stew into bowls. "And cachaca to drink, make specially for storm nights." Quibbleton discreetly ran his handheld scanner over the stew as a bowl was placed before him. His eyes widened in alarm. "Commander," he whispered urgently, "this food contains no fewer than 7 compounds that our database classifies as potentially harmful to most carbon-based life forms." "Poison?" Vexorian hissed. "Not exactly. The levels aren't immediately lethal, but they would cause significant discomfort to most species. And the liquid, cachaca, contains ethanol at a concentration of 40%, which is a powerful neurotoxin and solvent." Before Vexorian could order his team not to consume the offerings, he noticed his scout team was already eating and drinking alongside the humans, apparently suffering no ill effects. In fact, Lieutenant Zorf appeared to be enjoying himself immensely. His normally rigid posture relaxed as he conversed with a young human female. Grandma Beatrice noticed Vexorian's hesitation and frowned. She said something to Santos, who translated, "Mother says you too skinny. Need meat on bones before storm take you away. Eat." Feeling trapped by protocol and the need to maintain their cover, Vexorian reluctantly lifted a spoonful of the stew to his mouth. The moment the liquid touched his tongue, his sensory receptors exploded in what could only be described as pleasurable agony. Heat spread through his mouth, down his throat, and radiated throughout his entire body. Tears formed in all four of his eyes, and his respiratory rate doubled instantly. "Water!" he gasped, reaching for the nearest container. "No, no!" Santos laughed, pushing a glass of the amber liquid toward him instead. "Kachaka better for piri-piri heat." Desperate, Vexorian downed the kachaka in one gulp. The burning sensation in his mouth was immediately replaced by a different kind of fire, one that spread warmth through his entire nervous system and, most surprisingly, triggered a cascade of pleasure neurotransmitters in his brain. What is happening to me?" he asked, his voice sounding distant, even to his own hearing apparatus. "Is good, yes?" Santos grinned. "Piri-piri make you feel alive? Kachaka make you forget storm." Around the table, Vexorian's officers were having similar experiences. Clockina's eyes were rotating in asynchronous patterns. Grizzlethorpe was emitting bubbles at an alarming rate, and Blurpington's cap had changed from purple to a vibrant crimson. Only Quibbleton seemed relatively composed, having apparently decided to observe rather than participate. "More stew?" Grandma Beatrice asked, already ladling another portion into Vexorian's bowl before he could respond. As the meal progressed, Vexorian found himself relaxing, despite the continuing storm outside. The humans' ease with danger was still confounding, but there was something almost admirable about their resilience. They had built a community in a location that would be considered uninhabitable by most galactic standards. Yet they not only survived, but celebrated their harsh environment. "So," Santos said after they had eaten their fill and several rounds of kachaka had been consumed. "What is movie about? Aliens come to Earth, yes? Very original." He laughed heartily at his own joke. Vexorian. His thought processes somewhat impaired by the ethanol, but his diplomatic training still functional, decided to probe for information. "Yes, aliens visiting Earth. Tell me, Captain Santos, if aliens were to actually arrive, how do you think humans would respond?" Santos shrugged. "Depends on aliens. I think, if they friendly, we friendly. If they not friendly..." He made a gesture with his hand mimicking an explosion. "We not so friendly too." "You believe humans could defend themselves against a technologically superior species?" Vexorian asked, trying to keep the skepticism from his voice. "Superior technology, not everything," Santos replied, suddenly serious. "Humans survive ice ages, plagues, world wars, climate change. We adapt. We endure." He grinned again, raising his glass. "Also, we crazy. Do things no sensible species would do." As if to illustrate his point, the door to the bar burst open, admitting a group of drenched humans carrying surfboards, flat devices that Vexorian's database identified as recreational equipment used to ride ocean waves. "Best waves ever," one of them shouted, to cheers from the bar patrons. "They were in the ocean during this storm?" Clockina asked incredulously. "Of course," Santos laughed. "Storm waves, best waves. Little dangerous, yes, but most fun." Vexorian was about to inquire further when a small commotion broke out at the far end of the table. A young human child, perhaps 10 years old by their development standards, had approached Grandma Beatrice with some kind of container. "Lucia found stone crabs in tidal pools," Santos explained proudly. "My granddaughter, very brave. Those crabs have claws that can take finger off." "And you let a child collect these dangerous creatures?" Grizzlethorpe bubbled in alarm. Santos looked genuinely confused. How else she learn? Children must face small dangers to prepare for big dangers. The child, Lucia, was now helping Grandma Beatrice prepare the crabs, skillfully avoiding their powerful claws while chattering excitedly in Portuguese. What struck Vexorian most was not the child's dexterity, but the obvious pride with which the adults regarded her potentially dangerous activity. As the night wore on and the storm continued to rage outside, Vexorian found himself engaged in increasingly philosophical conversations with Santos and other villagers. The humans spoke of their relationship with danger, not as something to be avoided, but as an essential component of their existence, a force to be respected, understood, and occasionally challenged, but never feared to the point of paralysis. Life without risk is not living, Grandma Beatrice declared through Santos's translation, punctuating her statement by slapping a wooden spoon against the table with surprising force. Every morning we wake up, we take risk. Every fish we catch, we take risk. Every child we bear, we take risk. This is human way. Vexorian, his mind swimming with ethanol and capsaicin, found himself nodding in agreement before he could stop himself. There was something compelling about this philosophy, so different from the careful risk assessment and avoidance strategies of the Zorathak Empire. It was well past midnight when Grandma Beatrice announced it was time for sleep. The storm had not abated, but the villagers seemed unconcerned, assigning sleeping quarters to the aliens with the same casual hospitality they had shown all evening. Vexorian found himself sharing a small but sturdy cabin with Quibbleton, who had remained relatively sober throughout the evening. "Sir," Quibbleton said once they were alone, "I've been continuing my analysis of human behavior based on tonight's observations. Their relationship with risk and danger is unlike anything in our records." "I've noticed," Vexorian replied dryly, trying to ignore the room's tendency to spin whenever he moved his head too quickly. "It's not just their tolerance for environmental hazards or their recreational risk-taking," Quibbleton continued. "It's their entire cultural framework. They've developed social structures that celebrate survival rather than merely ensuring it. The consumption of potentially harmful substances, the deliberate exposure to danger, even their reproductive practices, all involve levels of risk that most species would find unacceptable." "Your point, Quibbleton?" "Sir, I believe we may have fundamentally misunderstood what makes Earth a Class 15 death world. It's not just the environmental conditions, formidable as they are. It's that the dominant species has evolved to thrive on risk and danger in ways that make them uniquely unpredictable." Vexorian considered this as another crash of thunder rattled the windows of their cabin. "You're suggesting that even if we could overcome the environmental challenges, the humans themselves would pose an insurmountable obstacle?" "I'm suggesting, Commander, that a species that chooses to live in places called Harbor of Storms, that drinks neurotoxins for pleasure, that deliberately adds pain-inducing compounds to their food, and that allows their young to handle dangerous wildlife as education, might not respond to conquest in the manner we anticipate." Before Vexorian could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind caused the entire structure to creak ominously. Yet, despite the noise and movement, he realized he felt strangely secure. The simple wooden building, constructed by beings with only the most basic technology, had withstood countless storms, similar to, or worse than the one currently raging. There was an elegance to its design that he hadn't appreciated initially, a perfect adaptation to its challenging environment. "Much like the humans themselves. We should get some rest," Vexorian finally said. "Tomorrow, once the storm has passed, we'll assess the damage to the fleet and reconsider our approach." "Very good, sir," Quibbleton replied, settling onto his assigned sleeping platform. "Though I feel I should mention one more thing from the intelligence report." "What's that?" "Apparently, humans have a cultural practice called running with the bulls, where they deliberately place themselves in the path of charging bovines, weighing up to 1,000 kilograms. "For what purpose?" Vexorian asked, genuinely baffled. "Entertainment, sir." Vexorian stared at the ceiling for a long time after that, listening to the storm and contemplating a species that would consider proximity to charging megafauna as a form of amusement. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape. The beach was littered with debris from the storm, driftwood, seaweed, and the occasional unfortunate marine creature. The villagers were already out in force, repairing minor damage to buildings, collecting useful items from the beach, and preparing fishing boats to return to the sea. Vexorian stood on the porch of the cabin, watching this flurry of activity with newfound appreciation. These humans had not merely survived the storm, they had incorporated it into their way of life, treating its aftermath not as a disaster, but as an opportunity. "Coffee?" a voice asked from behind him. Vexorian turned to find Grandma Beatrice holding 2 steaming mugs of a dark liquid. His translator indicated this was a stimulant beverage derived from roasted plant seeds. Remembering the previous night's experiences with human consumables, Vexorian hesitated briefly before accepting the mug. The aroma was intense but not unpleasant, and when he cautiously sipped the liquid, he found its bitter complexity strangely satisfying. "Thank you," he said, inclining his head respectfully. Grandma Beatrice smiled and spoke at length, which his translator rendered as, "Your friends already helping with repairs. Strange-looking creatures, but strong workers and quick learners. Your movie must be very important to have such dedicated actors." Before Vexorian could respond, his communication device signaled an incoming transmission from the inevitable Triumph. Excusing himself, he moved a short distance away before answering. "Commander," Klakina's voice came through, strained and tired. "We've managed to stabilize the ship's critical systems, but the damage is extensive. Hull integrity is compromised in 17 locations. The main propulsion system is offline, and we've lost contact with 8 vessels in the escort fleet." "Casualties?" Vexorian asked, dreading the answer. "Surprisingly few, given the circumstances. Mostly injuries from system malfunctions and sudden gravity fluctuations. However, morale is concerning. Many crew members are expressing doubts about the wisdom of attempting to conquer a planet with such hostile environmental conditions." Vexorian found he couldn't blame them. His own certainty had been eroded not just by the storm's ferocity, but by the revelations of the previous evening. A species that thrived in conditions that had nearly destroyed a technologically advanced fleet was not one to be underestimated. "Maintain position and continue repairs," he ordered. "I'll return to the ship once we've gathered more intelligence about the humans' vulnerabilities." As he ended the transmission, he noticed Santos approaching with a group of villagers. "Your ship still floating?" Santos asked cheerfully. "Storm was good one, but not great one. September hurricanes much stronger." "Our vessel sustained some damage," Vexorian admitted, "but nothing irreparable." "Good, good." Santos clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that would have been considered a grave insult in Zorathak culture, but which Vexorian was beginning to recognize as a human sign of camaraderie. "Since weather nice now, we thought maybe show you around village, yes? See how we live when not hiding from storms." The tour that followed was as enlightening as it was disconcerting. The village of Porto das Tempestades, despite its modest appearance, was a marvel of practical adaptation to its challenging environment. Buildings were constructed to channel rather than resist high winds. Water collection systems took advantage of frequent rainfall, and the entire community was designed to be quickly secured against approaching storms. But it was the recreational activities that truly astonished Vexorian and his officers. Barely 12 hours after a hurricane that had crippled their advanced spacecraft, humans were surfing in still turbulent waters, cliff diving from perilous heights into the ocean below, handling marine creatures that Quibbleton quietly identified as containing neurotoxins capable of killing most carbon-based life forms, consuming fermented beverages and spicy foods in quantities that should have rendered them incapacitated. "And this is normal behavior?" Vexorian asked Santos, as they watched a group of humans leap from a cliff edge into the churning sea below. "Normal is fun," Santos laughed. "Life too short to be afraid. Yes, we know dangers. We respect dangers, but we not hide from dangers. But some of these activities could result in death. Klakina pointed out, her 12 eyes wide with concern. Santos nodded solemnly. Yes, sometimes people die. Is sad when happens, but is part of life. No? If we not take risks, we not really living. This philosophy, so alien to the careful risk management that characterized Zorathak culture, was beginning to make a disturbing kind of sense to Vexorian. The humans' seemingly reckless behavior wasn't born of ignorance or stupidity. It was a deliberate choice to embrace life's uncertainties, rather than attempting to eliminate them entirely. As the day progressed, Vexorian found himself drawn into increasingly frank discussions with Santos and other village elders. The pretense of being a film crew was wearing thin, particularly as the humans demonstrated surprising knowledge about astrophysics, biology, and technology, knowledge that suggested they weren't nearly as primitive as initial assessments had indicated. It was during a midday meal at Santos's home that the conversation took a decisive turn. "So," Santos said casually, as they enjoyed another of Grandma Beatrice's spicy creations, "when you planning to tell us truth about why you here?" Vexorian nearly choked on his food. "Truth. We may live in simple village," Santos continued, "but we not stupid. Your ships, your technology, not from Earth. You come from stars, yes?" The table fell silent as Vexorian and his officers exchanged alarmed glances. Their cover, flimsy as it was, had been completely blown. "And if we were?" Vexorian finally asked, carefully measuring his words. Santos shrugged. "Depends on why you come. If for peaceful visit, you welcome. If for scientific study, many would volunteer. If for conquest—" His expression hardened slightly. "That would be unfortunate." "Unfortunate for whom?" Vexorian couldn't help asking, a hint of his old confidence returning. Grandma Beatrice, who had been quietly listening through Santos's translations, suddenly stood and approached Vexorian. Before anyone could react, she had rapped him sharply on the head with her wooden spoon, a gesture so unexpected and so at odds with his status as a military commander that he was momentarily speechless. She then launched into a lengthy speech in Portuguese, gesturing expressively with her spoon for emphasis. Santos translated, barely containing his amusement. "Mother says only fool tries to conquer what cannot be conquered. Storm cannot be conquered. Ocean cannot be conquered. And humans, with our stubborn hearts and silly ways, cannot be conquered. We too adaptable, too unpredictable, too willing to die for what we believe. Your ship's impressive, your weapons powerful, but you cannot even handle our weather, our food, our daily dangers. How you handle 7 billion humans, all crazy in different ways?" Vexorian stared at the elderly human, recognizing the truth in her words. The Zorathak conquest strategy relied on overwhelming force and the target species' desire for self-preservation. But what if the species in question had a fundamentally different relationship with risk and survival? What if they were willing to accept casualties that would be unthinkable to most civilizations? "We did not come in peace," Vexorian finally admitted, ignoring the gasps from his officers. "We came to conquer. Earth was to be the 48th world, added to the Zorathak Empire." Santos nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "And now?" "Now, I find myself reconsidering our approach." Vexorian gestured toward the window, where life in the village continued unabated. Children playing, fishermen preparing their boats, elders sharing stories. "Your species has qualities we did not anticipate. Your relationship with danger, your adaptability, your— what did you call it? Your crazy ways. These make you uniquely challenging adversaries." "Or uniquely valuable friends," Santos suggested quietly. The concept of friendship with a target species was so foreign to Zorathak conquest doctrine that Vexorian had no immediate response. The standard procedure when conquest was deemed unfeasible was to withdraw and quarantine the planet. not to establish diplomatic relations. Yet, as he looked around at the simple but effective community these humans had built in one of the most challenging environments on their planet, he couldn't help but recognize the potential benefits of cultural exchange rather than subjugation. The remainder of the day passed in a curious state of semi-formal diplomacy, interspersed with continued displays of human resilience and adaptability. Santos introduced Vexorian to village council members, local experts in various fields, and even a group of university researchers who happened to be studying coastal ecosystems in the area. Each interaction reinforced what Quibbleton had identified the night before. Humans weren't merely surviving on a death world. They were thriving, turning challenges into opportunities and dangers into celebrations of life. By evening, when Vexorian and his officers gathered privately to discuss their situation, the consensus was clear. Earth would not be added to the Zorathak Empire, at least not through traditional conquest methods. The environmental challenges alone would require a complete redesign of our fleet. Klakana pointed out. Salt-resistant hulls, enhanced electrical insulation, reinforced propulsion systems impervious to avian interference. The expense would be astronomical. And even if we overcame the environmental obstacles, Blurpington added, the humans themselves present an even greater challenge. Their psychological profile is unlike anything in our records. They don't respond to threats and danger as expected. They adapt, innovate, and sometimes even seem to enjoy the challenge. Grizzlethorpe bubbled his agreement, the translation coming through as, their social structures are equally baffling. Individual humans will sacrifice themselves not just for family units, as many species do, but for abstract concepts like freedom and justice. How do you conquer a species willing to die for ideas? We don't, Vexorian said simply. At least, not through conventional means. He spent most of the night drafting a report to the Zorathak High Command, carefully detailing the numerous factors that made Earth unsuitable for standard conquest procedures. The morning found him bleary-eyed, but resolved as he gathered his officers for the return to the inevitable triumph. The villagers turned out en masse to bid them farewell, many bringing gifts of food, drink, and handcrafted items. Grandma Beatrice presented Vexorian with a sealed container of her spicy fish stew and a bottle of cachaca, while Santos offered a small, carved figure of a fishing boat weathering a storm. To remind you, Santos said with a knowing smile, that small things can survive big dangers if they know how to bend without breaking. As they prepared to board their repaired shuttle, Santos pulled Vexorian aside for a final word. You come back sometime, yes? Not for conquest, but as visitors. Much to learn from each other, I think. Vexorian, to his own surprise, found himself agreeing. Perhaps, though I must warn you, my report will recommend updating Earth's classification from Class 15 to Class Infinity Deathworld, with a strict quarantine recommendation. Santos laughed heartily. Perfect. Keeps away tourists. Only bring interesting visitors, like you. The journey back to the inevitable triumph was mercifully uneventful. The skies clear, and the ocean relatively calm compared to their arrival. As they approached the massive vessel, still bearing visible scars from its encounter with Earth's weather, Vexorian reflected on the profound shift in his understanding, not just of this particular planet, but of what it meant to be truly adaptable. Once aboard, he immediately called a full senior staff meeting to officially announce his decision. Based on extensive first-hand observation and data analysis, he declared to the assembled officers, I am hereby classifying Earth as unsuitable for standard conquest procedures. The combination of extreme environmental hazards and the native species' unique psychological and cultural adaptations makes traditional subjugation methods not only impractical, but potentially catastrophic for our forces. A murmur of relief swept through the room. Few had been eager to return to the storm-lashed planet's surface after witnessing what a mere weather system had done to their advanced vessels. What is your recommendation, Commander? asked the fleet's senior administrator. Earth's classification should be immediately upgraded to Class Infinity Deathworld, too hazardous for direct engagement. Furthermore, I recommend establishing a remote observation post to study human adaptability traits for possible integration into our own training and development programs. This last suggestion raised eyebrows, or equivalent sensory appendages, throughout the command deck. The Zorathak Empire did not typically look to conquered or quarantined species for inspiration. "You believe these humans have something to teach us?" the administrator asked skeptically. Vexorian thought of Grandma Beatrice's wooden spoon, of children playing in surf that would terrify most Zorathak citizens, of Santos's easy laughter in the face of dangers that had nearly destroyed a conquest fleet. "I believe," he said carefully, "that any species that can turn a Class 15 Deathworld into a home, not merely a survival situation, but a place where they thrive, celebrate, and deliberately seek out additional challenges for pleasure, possesses qualities worthy of study." He paused, then added, "And I believe that true intelligence lies not in conquering everything we encounter, but in recognizing when we might learn more through observation and exchange than through subjugation." The fleet departed Earth's orbit 36 hours later, after completing essential repairs to the inevitable Triumph and its escort vessels. As the blue-green planet receded in the viewports, Vexorian stood alone on the observation deck, sipping from a mug of coffee, a supply of which had been included among the parting gifts from Porto das Tempestades. The bitter, complex beverage, like so much about Earth and its dominant species, had initially seemed unpleasant, even hostile. Yet with exposure and understanding, he had come to appreciate its subtle qualities and surprising effects. Somewhere on that swirling sphere of deadly weather patterns, corrosive oceans, and electrical atmospheric discharges, a small fishing village was going about its daily life, adapting, enduring, and perhaps even telling stories about the strange visitors from the stars who couldn't handle a little rain and wind. Vexorian smiled at the thought, raised his mug in a silent toast to Grandma Beatrice and her wooden spoon of wisdom, and turned to begin composing the most unusual report of his military career. On the reclassification of Earth to Class Infinity Deathworld status, a case study in evolutionary adaptation to extreme conditions and its implications for interspecies relations. The conquered worlds of the Zorathak Empire would remain at 47. Earth, it seemed, had conquered its would-be conquerors instead.